government of everything.
Fire, sorry, I think I'll take this off actually. Go on.
Will Boris hold China to its promise of freedom in Hong Kong?
Don't come this way, don't come this way. Don't come this way. They're coming this way.
They're after you, Nick. Nick, what are you doing with them? Let them go. It's like that. The other week there was this. There were these two. Did you see that? The Jedi and this great big Muslim guy. Did you see it on the internet? They were like man to man, man to man. That's woman to woman. The poor little guy's only about 2 foot tall though. All running. Look at all running after it.
Now is a gate. A gate. Just close the gate.
Cat fight. Any case, where were we? What was this? Hong Kong.
Will Boris hold China?
Don't forget, Boris only came to power this week, so we've got themes on that as well. Will Boris hold China?
Hold
What to
China
account?
to its promise on freedom,
promise?
freedom in Hong Kong. You know this controversy that's happening in Hong Kong.
In relation to the Hong Kong situation, it is not about freedom. A Hong Kong guy murdered his girlfriend in Taiwan. The Taiwanese wanted to extradite him to Taiwan. Under Hong Kong law, no legislation existed to do that. Therefore, the Hong Kong legislature tried to create a regulation, a law, that would allow extradition. Hong Kong youth and sections of the business strata, sections of them, backed by, well, there's a lot of NGOs in Hong Kong, about 32,000 NGOs in Hong Kong, actively pursuing various policies associated with democratization of China as a whole. And there are a lot of, don't forget, British and British-related administrative structures in Hong Kong, and also ties internationally with Britain and America. And if you've seen on the demonstrations over the last week, the American flag has been prominent, and many people have been calling, not a majority, but many people prominent in the movement have been calling for Donald Trump to take action against China. So within the context of this, you have to understand the events taking place. And although it's perfectly legitimate for the Hong Kong population to protest, the movement that we are seeing now is not a movement for freedom and democracy, as they like to make out. And the British, by the way, had a policy under Margaret Thatcher, or better said, the British Army developed a policy to shoot protesters in Hong Kong. They had Brigadier Biggs was in charge at the time, and he worked out, they initially had a policy, first sticks, then tear gas, and they said, like, just drop the sticks, tear gas, just start shooting. So, I'm not saying they did it, but this was the policy of the British authorities. So, it's a false delusion to imagine the British were supporters of freedom and democracy, or are supporters of freedom and democracy. It is, however, true that there are people and interests who would like to use Hong Kong as a staging post for revolutionary overthrow of the government of China. And some people imagined that if there's a movement in Hong Kong, it will spread to the mainland. Actually, unfortunately, because of the historical development of Hong Kong, its ties to Britain, and its antagonism to China, to mainland China, there has developed a movement that's based upon what you can call localism. They want de facto independence from China. And of course, anyone who really understands the balance of forces in China will know China will never grant independence to Hong Kong. Because if they were to do so, it would mean the breakup of China. Other parts of China would also claim independence. And so what happened, however, was not that the Hong Kong protest strengthened, if you like, demands for democracy and freedom and so on in China. On the contrary, Hong Kong, within Hong Kong, a layer of the localists have started attacking Chinese people. They think that Chinese people are uncultured, uneducated. They shit on the street. They let their children shit on the street. Because in China, little children, from the villages, and these are, they don't have nappies. They just have a slit trousers. They sit down and shit on the street or pee on the street. I don't see anything wrong with that. But in Hong Kong, it's touched the sensibilities of those who think that they're more cultured, more educated, more developed, different and distinct to the rest of China, which of course to some degree is true, because they had, after all, after Hong Kong was created as a British enclave for 150 years, this was, a colony of Britain. My uncle in Hong Kong is Chinese, and he was a doctor on the Nathan Road in the centre of Hong Kong. And I remember going there in 1990, and 1989, sorry. I went there in 1989, he goes, let's go for dinner. So I thought, oh great, I'm going to go for a fantastic meal in one of these Hong Kong restaurants. And he says, we'll meet at the horse racing club. Horse racing club, I went down there. Went in the horse racing club, he sits down, he goes, his face began to turn into an Englishman. And he says, they have wonderful Yorkshire pudding, like that. So basically he had become, along with the colonial elite in Hong Kong, they had become English. Right? So this is the background context to understand events happening in Hong Kong. Now, as regards the extradition treaty, Britain had an extradition treaty with Hong Kong, or basically Britain was subordinate to or better said, Hong Kong was subordinate to British extradition law. And so if you committed a crime in Hong Kong and you were British, you could be extradited to Britain. If you committed a crime in Britain and you were from Hong Kong, you could be extradited to Hong Kong. Nothing so unusual about that. What they want, however, is that nobody be extradited from Hong Kong to mainland China. Supposedly because you might have political dissidents who are in Hong Kong who then get transported to China. Now, in reality, the danger, of course, is from the standpoint of the Chinese mainland government, is what if every wealthy guy in China who wants to escape imprisonment for corruption and theft just goes to Hong Kong instead and says, you can't extradite me, there's nothing, you can't touch me. And that's the reason why the Chinese will never allow long-term Hong Kong to operate whatever it likes. Now, one man, one vote, that's perfectly legitimate demand, but in the context of China, in the current circumstances, what you've really got is a localist, independentist movement that, in my opinion, has no progressive content whatsoever. They're not, the people in Hong Kong, many of them live, well now the peculiarity is this, back in 1989, before Tiananmen Square, living standards in Hong Kong were far higher than in the mainland. Now, many people in the urban areas in China live better than those in Hong Kong. And people, the Hong Kong business elite, they invested their money across the border because it was cheaper to invest. And housing space in Hong Kong is minimal. Many people, ordinary working people, live 5, 6, 8 or 12 to a room. And many of them, they swap their beds, hot beds, 8 hours a day. You're on that bed, 8 hours a day, you're on that bed. And so because the capitalists of Hong Kong have not carried out basic social reforms that meet the needs of the masses in Hong Kong, there's only a few million of them, they could have easily done it. Living standards have risen far higher in the mainland China, particularly in the urban areas, and Shenzhen and Shanghai and Beijing and Tianjin and even places like Chongqing and Chengdu. Living standards for the workers have risen dramatically, whereas living standards for the workers in Hong Kong have fallen dramatically. That sets the background. Actually, because of one country, two system policy, they've allowed the Hong Kong living standards to collapse.
Well, I have to say that having been to Hong Kong a number of times, that the living standards, you say, yes, I mean, certainly are falling, have been recently, but there are millions, tens of millions of people in mainland China who have got very, very little.
Well, yes, but of course that's true. Of course that's true.
And you have to accept that.
I'm not disputing that. I said living standards have risen dramatically in China.
For the middle class, that's true.
Not only for the middle class.
Mostly.
Well, according to the World Bank, China has carried out in the last 30 years the most rapid development of its economy, of any economy, and of poverty eradication of any country in world history.
But would you accept,
now,
they've got a long
although,
way to go to catch up with
of course, well, no, that's not true.
Right.
Hong Kong is only a city. I'm not sure the population, maybe 10 million, right? Now, Shenzhen, however, has a population larger than Hong Kong, and that in 1990 was still a village, and the people earned £20 a month, when the Hong Kong population had living standards similar to Malaysia or the wealthy areas of Taiwan, of Thailand, or even Singapore in the 1970s. But because of the freewheeling, free market capitalist ethos in Hong Kong, the mass of people in Hong Kong have suffered a decline in living standards, and also a comparatively lower living standard than the urban masses in China. The urban masses in China, at least those registered in the urban areas, which is about 300 million people. So
many people you'd agree are living
I have not disputed.
And also the human rights record in China compared with Hong Kong is awful. I mean, really, really bad. You know? So there are many, many differences. You cannot compare Hong Kong with mainland China. Mainland China's got a long, long way to go.
What's going on in Hong Kong and why?
We've just been discussing that. I am not disputing. I mean, you've got to contextualize the circumstances. One is a city, I don't know how many million, 6 or 10 million, I don't know. And the rest of China, 1.4 thousand million, right? And it's on that basis, you see, if China was a cauldron of discontent, awaiting what Mao Zedong said, a single spark that would light a prairie fire, then some people in Hong Kong imagine, even some on the left, unfortunately, seem to imagine that this is what's happening, some sort of spark of revolution that will sweep across China. On the contrary, the historical background of Hong Kong as a colony, as lackeys of the British, as linked in with the British establishment, as advocates of free market economics. And now at the front of the demonstrations you see the British flag and the American flag. People calling on Donald Trump to invade Hong Kong and protect the Hong Kong people. I believe, one is, of course that will never happen, but the intention is that there's an organization been founded in the United States of America called the Committee for the Present Danger. It was originally set up to fight the Soviet Union. It's been revamped last year, led of course by Steve Bannon, the universal, ubiquitous, international counter-revolutionary champion. And he advocated that they should turn China into the #1 enemy in the world with the objective of overthrowing the Communist Party of China.
Or breaking it up.
And whether China then breaks up is irrelevant. If you weaken China by smashing the rule of the Communist Party, by undermining the dominance of public ownership of the economy, then of course America gains and China loses. If China enters a period of crisis, chaos, disorder, then of course America will gain vis-a-vis China, the number one competitor, at least in theory, in the world. Actually, Japan is a stronger competitor of America, but nevertheless, yes, Japan is a powerful. Is the
So it's like Britain, it's another state. Basically, they can't even talk about their alliance with
look,
America.
look. In 1926, Britain, in theory, was an ally of America, but Britain was that close to war with America because Britain lost its dominance in the shipping lanes of the world because America said, we will build more ships, more naval ships than you. And since that time, since 1926, Britain did not go to war. Many people thought that was where the war would begin, the Second World War. It did not go to war, and it subordinated itself to American tutelage and made a deal with the Americans. And then the war broke out instead of between Britain and America, between Germany and Britain and Germany and Russia and so on. Now, because a country says it's an ally, doesn't mean it's actually an ally. Doesn't mean that. It's a momentary agreement between capitalist powers as to how they would divide the world between them. In the 1930s, many people expected that Britain would make an alliance with Germany, even under Adolf Hitler. Don't forget, what was his name? George VIII, the King of England, who abdicated. He was a firm, solid supporter of Adolf Hitler. Him and his wife went to meet Hitler multiple times. And when he resigned, when he abdicated the throne, and he was appointed, I think it was governor of Bermuda. When he was a governor of Bermuda, Adolf Hitler had a simple plan. If they can conquer England, conquer Britain with a military invasion, they will bring back the king from Bermuda and reappoint him King of England. And even the Queen of today, there are photographs of her in Windsor doing the Nazi salute. It was a family tradition to support Adolf Hitler and to support the Nazis. Primarily because Britain, this wasn't a joke in the Windsor family. It wasn't a joke in the Windsor family.
The royal family are German.
Yes, I know they're German. They changed their name. They changed their name in the First World War because otherwise they might be seen as enemies by the British people. And the British people might turn on the royal family because they were German. Because they were linked in with all the German ruling classes. But the truth of the matter is, the apparent alliance between countries can immediately turn into its opposite. Japan is an ally of America, but the Americans keep telling the Japanese, look after your own army, look after your own position, look after your own strength. They're saying that all around the world because they want to withdraw their armies from East Asia. But they can't do so if China is a strong power, and if Japan and China, however, were to balance each other out and were to be in conflict with each other, then of course the Americans could withdraw and then they could turn on the Japanese. Don't forget, America is an ally of France. But only 2 days ago, Donald Trump started imposing tariffs on France. Don't forget, America is an ally of Europe. But in order, or better said, one minute. It's difficult to concentrate if you're right in front of me. If you want to go to the back and talk like that, it'd be easier. It's difficult to concentrate otherwise. It's fine to talk a bit, but right here, it's difficult to concentrate. Any case.
Guess who the secretary was? The head of fucking Secret Services. I saw them with my eyes.
Okay.
So this is all just surface shit.
So, only a couple of days ago, the Americans imposed tariffs on French wine. So, you couldn't get a more direct attack on the French than putting tariffs on their wine, right? And the Americans are openly under Donald Trump, advocating the destruction of the European Union. That's why Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage are feted and welcomed in the White House. And these are our allies. So don't believe when we think allies. After all, what is the European Union? It's a French-German alliance. Why is there this desperate attempt to hold together France and Germany? Because they know if France and Germany can't be held together, despite their contradictory interests, contradictory battle over markets, contradictory ways of operating, contradictory class relations, political structures, despite this, they tried to hold it together desperately. But at some point, even the Franco-German alliance will break down, as it has done 1914, 1939.
1870.
So conflict is endemic to the system of society we live under. That system is called capitalism, and it is governed by the pursuit of profit, by capitalists based in nation states. And these nation states are constantly seeking to expand their influence and power based upon the interests of the capitalists who are rooted in that country. At a certain point, they make agreements and deals. When the cake is expanding and everyone can join in, you take that part, I'll take that part, you take that part, I'll take that part. But when the cake is no longer expanding, the contradictions and conflicts come to a head. And all of a sudden, reason becomes unreason and wrong right. Allies become enemies, enemies become allies. So it is throughout the history of capitalism for the last 300 years.
Look at the carve up of Africa. You
Yes,
said,
exactly.
come to Berlin.
Exactly.
Right, you can have this.
They
we'll
made
have
a
this,
deal.
You can have that bit.
Yes.
We'll have this.
They
bit.
made
We'll
a
exploit
deal
these poor
to
people.
divide Africa.
We'll fucking take everything out of there we can. All their minerals,
Just
all
tell me
their
unfortunately.
fucking everything. We'll take everything out of Africa. You, the Germans, the French, the fucking everything. Right? We'll exploit these people to the fucking limit, and that's what we've done.
Yes, but you see, 1896, the Treaty of Berlin, where they decided to divide up Africa. They decided it's got
1886.
resources.
1886.
1886. And then, so what did they do?
About how they did it.
For 20 years, they conquered these countries, and then they decided we still haven't got enough. So then the Brits, the French, the Germans, the Italians, the Portuguese, the Belgians, they all
Belgium's
suddenly
the
said,
worst.
there's no more space unless we take on our European enemies, which might have been allies a few weeks before, and then through taking them on, we conquer their territory. Adolf Hitler, in his last rambling days, he had some very apposite analysis. He said, what I did wrong is the following, he said. I should have mobilized the Muslim masses against Britain in the colonies. I should have declared, we will give independence to all the Arab states. Then they would rise up against the British, pin the British down in North Africa and the Middle East, and then we could have had a much better opportunity to attack Britain. And the Americans, don't forget, stayed out of the First and the Second World War until they had the opportunity to, once the two sides had fought each other to a standstill, they hoped they'd have the opportunity to conquer the world by mopping up at the end of the war. And that's what happened. After the First World War, America became the dominant power, pushed Britain out. After the Second World War, established global economic dominance because 2/3 of the world's gold reserves were in Fort Knox, and they could determine the dynamics of development of the world after the Second World War through the Marshall Plan.
Can I ask you to go into some more detail about that? The decline of Britain and the rise of America specifically.
Remember that
You've spoken about it in quite general. Just give a bit more detail about it. Because I feel like it's like a taboo.
After the Second World War, I don't know the exact statistic, but about 50% of world production was based in America. Don't forget, compare this to 1850, 1860, when 2/3 of world production was based in Britain. 2/3 of the world. We had the first factories and industries. That's where Britain's greatness was known from. And it was because of these factories and industries that Britain was able and required colonial domination. Because they weren't able to sell the goods all to the British. They had to sell. There was one politician, I don't remember his name. He said, if we can get all Chinese people to wear long shirts, long sleeve shirts, we'll keep the cotton, or we'll keep the textile mills of Lancashire running for 1,000 years. And so they hoped through colonial domination to provide the resources to stabilise Britain, which they did. They did stabilise Britain that way. 1848, when revolution swept across Europe, the whole European continent faced revolution. Britain avoided it because Britain, we had the same problems as the rest of Europe, but we had colonies. And because of that, we maintained low prices by importing cheap goods from around the world and put tariffs on the colonies and made the colonial people suffer. The consequence of that was that Britain rode out the 1848 revolutions and grew and expanded to become, by 1947, the biggest empire in the history of the world. Bigger than the Mongolian Empire of 1260. And the consequence of that was Britain overstretched its position. And the Americans, of course, with a strong industrial base, developed from the beginning of the 20th century, reaching its pinnacle really in the 1950s. American dominance of the world was less colonial, because don't forget, the mindset was different in America. America was a colony. They broke free. They led the first, if you like, independence revolutionary movement. Well, not the first, but one of the first independence movements in the world.
The thing is,
America's culture,
right?
its nature, its
Second
character
World War-
was forged by
Second
the
World
struggle
War-
against British colonial dominance.
The Second World War was the best thing that could have happened to America,
Yes.
because all the other powers were severely damaged. They were hardly touched, which left them top dog, right? And then they, with the Marshall Plan, they built up Europe, not because they cared a shit about Europe, because Europe was going to buy their goods, right?
Well,
So
it wasn't
in the
just buying the
1950s
goods.
and the
It was
1960s,
also because
right, America became top dog, and it hasn't been. But China are going to fucking topple them within the next 20 years.
Is America being?
Guarantee you.
Is America where
Come
we
back to
were
that.
with overextending? Is America overextending itself today?
Well, America has overextended
Is
itself
that
in
why it's
many
withdrawing
ways.
all its support from?
And Donald Trump's position, the distinction between the Democrats and Donald Trump, is not one of substance, despite what some of the leftists inside the American political discourse, like AOC and Bernie Sanders and co advocate. In reality, these are two wings of American capitalism. One wing wants global participation, a continued global role for America, its imperial operations covered over, or if you like, decorated with humanitarian talk of freedom, talk of democracy, talk of women's rights, gay rights, transsexual rights, no matter what it is. Because in that way, you do a catch-all. Any Islamic country, well, you can condemn them, manipulate them. You can do that economically, and you can do that politically. And you can gain a certain audience of support inside these countries, backed by your economic activity, by global military participation, by global economic activity, multinational companies, and the core of American power is its navy. The naval conflict, basically when America took over from Britain as the #1 naval power in the world in 1926. That's when the world balance of power changed in favor of the United States of America.
Since World War II, it's
The
been Air Force.
Navy, well, it's not Air Force actually.
Well, what did they do to Japan? in
Yes,
1945?
they bombed them, but they also had to invade the country and conquer it. They had to put troops on the ground to dominate the country. They did, at the time of the Vietnam War, conclude. There were sections of the military who concluded the way out of being dragged into a quagmire where hundreds of thousands of American soldiers would be dragged into, and many of them maimed and killed. Instead of this, they decided, well, there's a technological solution. It's like Boris Johnson's border solution to Ireland. The technological solution is we have laser-guided missiles, we target the enemy from space, and then we blow them up at a distance. And that's, of course, how they conquered Iraq. But don't forget this, although they conquered Iraq with an air force, although they sent in their army after the Air Force defeated Saddam Hussein, they still had to put troops on the ground. They still had to try to create some type of government. And what was revealing, what led actually to Donald Trump's election, what was revealing about that was they couldn't consolidate power. And so what happened was a hobnob and bobtail of goons from Europe and America volunteered to go and fight with these lunatics in IS. And with 5,000 troops, they destroyed, within 6 months, they destroyed the Iraqi army, who had been trained, armed and organised by the Americans for 10 years.
The Iraqi army didn't even try and fight them in Mosul.
Of course, because America had not been able to consolidate a satisfactory base of power within Iraq. And now, of course, they're drumming up the drums against Iran, precisely because Iran is the number one influence in Iraq now. Yes. After all this war, Iran dominates Iraq.
Yes, yes.
And therefore the Americans want to bang the drums of war again. Although Donald Trump, actually, this is the one positive feature about Donald Trump, is that he doesn't want to go to war, because he knows that's a path to disaster. And so Donald Trump uses his the economic dominance of America that it has today with its navy. Whoever's smoking skunk, can you just make sure it blows slightly different way? I don't mind, but it's just it makes me stoned when I'm talking.
Can't control the wind.
You know what I mean? Well, wherever he is, just a little bit over there, be fine. You can make the audience stoned, but not the speaker. Now, so American economic might, its position globally now remains dominant, and therefore its objective, strategic, simple objective. You've got a certain amount of power, you want to hold that power and extend that power, or at least ameliorate the decline of that power. How do you do it? You make everyone else pay. You impose tariffs. You demand the other side must capitulate. Of course, Boris Johnson thinks he can do the same thing. He thinks because Britain was a powerful country, and of course, he's arranged all this with Donald Trump in advance.
Still is a powerful.
That's why as soon as Boris Johnson was elected leader of the Conservative Party, off he goes to America to discuss with Donald, or better say, to discuss it with Donald Trump. Immediately, we can do a trade deal 2 times, 3 times, 10, 1,000,000 times greater. Why? Britain's got 1,000,000 times greater trade deal to be done. So he says. Well, 5 times he said, but he said 3, 4, 5. What is it? 3, 4, 5? Who cares? Because with Donald Trump, it's not about the fact. It's not about the detail. It's about the posturing. It's about the power associated with it. To be fair, people want to know, but Boris Johnson, what's he going to do? I think he will do what he says. He will leave the European Union on the 31st of October.
That's sovereignty today.
He will do that.
Do what America says.
And well, that's not just what America says, it's also because the Conservative Party will be annihilated otherwise. If they don't do it, the Brexit Party will take over. No more Conservative Party. All those guys from Eton, Oxford, Cambridge, Harrow, Charterhouse School, 5 institutions, all of them come from there.
Don't be cross.
Those people do not wish to lose power. And the only way they can stop losing power is to posture and take the same stance as the Brexit Party has. So they will make an alliance with the Brexit Party, stand candidates wherever there are intransigent Tories. Boris Johnson will give a nod and a wink and say, you stand there. And Nigel Farage will say, wherever you've got Brexiteers, we won't stand candidates. And of course, that, in my opinion, that will win the election. The only reason why, and I'll be quite clear about this, I've been supporting and backing Jeremy Corbyn since 2015. The first day he stood, I remember standing here, people were sceptical, thought I was a fool. I've been supporting him ever since. But now we're in trouble. We are in trouble. And the reason we're in trouble is as follows. Because the establishment inside the Labour Party, inside the media, inside the army, the secret services, the mass media, they have been 100% opposed to Corbyn all along. But he has not stood up and fought them. Every time they come out with some spurious anti-Semitism allegation, he says, oh yes. Every time they kept saying, we must say Remain, we must say Remain, we must say Remain. He tried not to. But now he turned around and he said, yes. Nobody likes someone who capitulates. If he was to turn round, as I believe he should do, this is the way Corbyn could win. If Corbyn came on television, he said, it's three, and I know this is a fact. I know the entourage around Corbyn. I know exactly what's going on inside the Labour Party. Corbyn only has 25 MPs behind him. 25. All the rest of the Labour MPs want to undermine him. They would prefer Boris Johnson in power for 5 years or 10 years than Jeremy Corbyn in power. That's the truth inside the Labour Party. And therefore the only way he can change the balance of forces is to call on Labour Party members. Tell them the truth. I've been under constant attack. I've been isolated, sabotaged, slandered, lied about. I've tried to keep the party together, but I'm no longer able to. And therefore he should say, we need a new, genuine Labour Party by deselecting all MPs who have been sabotaging, attacking, and who will not support the campaign for social change and social justice. And all those bleating and attacking. Kick them out!
If he just resigned.
Why should he resign? He's been elected twice. He's been elected leader with a thumping majority twice. If the members go to their party meetings, demand the deselection of the MPs who've been sabotaging it.
Why are they sabotaging?
Because they do not believe in socialism. They believe in capitalism. And they think he believes in socialism and is a threat to capitalism. And therefore he attacks their privilege, their prestige, their authority, their jobs. We know this from years of experience now. Therefore, if he was to turn around and say, enough and no more, now we must move on to the offensive, attack those inside the party who've been attacking him, non-stop, day in, day out, then people would turn around and say, oh, he's got his mojo back. Now he's prepared to fight.
Why don't you substitute yourself for him? You have more ideas.
What are you talking about?
Just blow the lid off all the sections.
My friend.
You could do better what he has failed to do.
Well, you misunderstand what's going on. This is not because Corbyn is a weak person. It's not because Corbyn is a weak person. Corbyn actually is, as Len McCluskey once said, a man of steel. He's withstood incredible pressures to back down, drop out, succumb. He hasn't given in, except where he felt he had to. I think he was wrong to do that. The problem is this. The membership need to be mobilised to oust these traitors inside our movement and to reform. I'm advocating it now. I'm advocating it now. I'm advocating what I believe inside the party.
Isn't the fact that socialism has had its day?
No, it's not.
It hasn't worked. It hasn't worked anywhere that's been tried. So it's had its day, so people are not going to want to believe it.
I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true. Not because...
It doesn't work though, does it? It doesn't work.
Oh, for God's sake, man, you've just been blabbering for about half an hour. Right in front of me. Right in front of me. Why right in front of me?
Carry on.
Why don't you do it? There's a big park. Why right in front of me? Why?
Well, if I want to talk to this guy
But why?
or this guy, you don't.
But
fucking
where
have
are
a
you?
right
Look
to
where you're
dictate
located.
that. You don't have a right
Look
to
where you're
dictate.
located.
Why?
I'm a speaker.
Huh?
I've been speaking
Politically.
for
Are you a
33
fascist?
years.
Are you a fascist?
Well, if you were listening,
Right
you'd gather I'm
about
not.
now, You've been drawn out this one, bro.
What?
You're questioning my freedom of speech.
I'm not
And
questioning
you
your
define
freedom of
I have the
speech.
freedom
You
to
are
talk to
undermining.
Yes, you are.
You are
You're talking
undermining.
shit.
You are
Shut the fuck
undermining.
up.
You
You're
are
talking
undermining
shit.
freedom of speech.
Motherfucker.
You're not supporting
Shut
it.
the fuck
You're
up.
undermining
I'll
it.
talk to this guy. This guy.
Well, none of them seem that keen to talk to you.
I'll talk to my fucking self if I want.
Well, exactly.
None of your fucking business then, is it?
Anywhere.
Get on
So
with
if
what
I
you're
was to
saying,
move,
bro.
are you going to follow me?
Get on with
Are
what
you gonna
you're
follow
saying.
me?
Bro, I was listening to some of yours.
If I was to move, would you follow me?
Stop the fucking drama and get on with what you're
Drama.
saying.
I'm trying to
You're just a
explain to
fucking
you
attention seeker.
how Speaker's Corner
Get on
works.
with what you're saying.
How
bro.
it works.
I
It
don't
doesn't
give a fuck.
work.
This is a
If
free
I stand
space.
up here,
What the fuck are you gonna do? Move me then. This is a free space, bro.
my friend,
What are you talking about?
my friend, how long you been coming here?
I don't give a fuck. I live around here, so you can't
How
come
long you
here
been
and tell
coming
me
here?
what the fuck to do.
I'm just
where I
you're
live,
telling
bro.
me about Speaker's
Shut
Corner.
up.
I've been speaking
Get
here
on with your
33
speech, you
years.
fool.
33
Get on with your
years.
speech, man.
And all you can do is come out in response to my polite
You know what, I'm
request,
just gonna switch
to my
off for
polite
you, you're a
request
fucking idiot.
that you don't interrupt
You've
the
got
meeting
some knowledge,
right in
man,
front of me,
but now
right in
you're
front of
acting
me.
a fucking idiot.
I'm
Just
trying to
carry
get
on.
you to
Carry on,
recognise
mind
the
your fucking business
culture
about what
of the
I'm
place
doing.
where you are. Right?
Bro,
You're in a
Am I
place where there
fucking
is a
alone? I'm
culture
thinking that this
of
place
free
is
speech.
having my freedom
The
of speech
culture
right
of free
now.
speech does
And
not
my
mean
freedom of space,
that if
where
you
the
stand
fuck
up
I
and
can go.
speak, that a whole load of people around you blabber
Give a
on right in
shit.
front of you at exactly
I
the
don't
same
give a
time.
fucking shit.
How can that be free speech?
Stop me, bro. Stop me then if
I'm
you
trying
have a
to.
problem with it.
I'm trying
Well,
to.
you're not succeeding.
I'm trying to by getting
Just
into your
fucked up
head.
part of your vibe and your talk. You could have carried on fucking
All
doing
right,
your
have
thing.
it your way. It's your meeting.
Yeah, enjoy this on fucking. Enjoy this on YouTube. If you want to check my fucking Instagram channel, I make trap beats and drill beats, innit? It's gangster underscore dog.
Good for you.
You know them ones. That's a good fucking promo, man. Thanks.
What else you got to say?
Thank you.
What else
That's
you
it
got to
they'll
say?
do, bro. When that goes on YouTube,
It's on YouTube.
a lot of people are going to like this. Of
course they're gonna love
They're
it.
going to support me on it. And they're going to probably follow my fucking page.
Where were we?
So get on with it, bro.
Oh yeah, where were we?
I was just saying, hasn't socialism been discredited as a system that actually works?
Now,
Political ideas, political movements are not dependent on whether they succeed or not in establishing their final objective. Liberal democracy, is it a powerful movement? Yes. Is it something that's anchored strongly in any country in the world? No. No, it's not. In America, for example, people believe. That's why so many people are horrified, because they thought their ideals, liberal thinking, free speech, free political parties, sexual liberation, racial equality, they thought this was anchored in the mind of the people and in the body of America. It is not. People thought those values are anchored in British society. They are not. They appear to be because a section of the population supports them. But they've discovered after the Brexit vote, look at the people, they demonstrate. Hundreds of thousands of people, some say millions, demonstrated to remain in the European Union, to keep up the values of the European Union. But even though they demonstrate thinking those ideals are incarnated by the European Union, in Poland, in Hungary, those ideas have been thrown out the window. They are members of the European Union. They're not leaving anytime soon. And yet they are both authoritarian states that do not recognise those values. And yet in Britain people still believe them. Socialism is not powerful because it is something that has been realised. It is powerful because it represents a group interest within society. The working classes, by definition, in their exploitation at work, when they challenge that exploitation, when they question how long they're allowed for their toilet break, when they question how long their lunch break is, when they question when their wages are reduced or not increased enough, the working classes pose automatically questions that veer towards socialism. Who should control? Who should decide? How should we work? How much leisure do we have? How much freedom do we have?
People with
How do
money.
our children live?
It's simple. People with the money have the power.
Well, there
It's-
you go.
It's as simple as that.
So
You've got money,
so-
you've got power.
so-
Look at George Osborne,
But
right?
let me just
He's
return
fucking
it.
got
But
6
this is
jobs,
simplification.
right? He turns
Let's
up one
return-
day a week for a board meeting, right? For some financial institute in the city. He gets £650,000 a year, whilst he's fucking editor of the Evening Standard, right? How's he getting away with that? How the fuck did these people?
So it
Because
is
he's been
what
to
you
Wheaton
just said.
and fucking Oxford.
It is what you've just said, precisely because that crude language summarises, I mean, you expressed it with anger, with passion. If people around the country were to watch that in a 3-second YouTube clip, they'll be going, yeah, he's right.
Do nothing about it, though.
Millions
Do
of
nothing
people will
about
be
it.
going, yeah, he's right. Why are they doing that? Because socialism is anchored in the condition of society under capitalism. It's created by capitalism, not because they intend to create it, but because they create and it survives. Capitalism lives off the labour power of the workers, lives off exploiting the workers, and therefore the indignation and hatred expressed by the workers at their condition automatically brings forth socialist consciousness. That is why socialism is not dead. And what comes out of that, well, Marx explained. Socialism,
It isn't dead.
just
because
one minute,
it doesn't have any
just
power,
1
does
second.
It has no
Socialism is the alternative way of working out from the existing order of society where we can go. Once you've a movement combined together to defend the rights of the workers, automatically the workers begin to lean towards socialist solutions.
But it hasn't changed. Look at Boris Johnson. Oxford, Eton, fucking Oxford, politics,
Yeah, we
never
said
done a
that a minute
day's
ago.
work in his
Yeah.
fucking life.
Well, he
Prime
has.
Minister, right?
He has.
So it hasn't changed, has it? In the last 100 years, it hasn't fucking changed.
We've got the National
It's
Health
still-
Service got socialist.
Yeah, of course we have.
That's changed.
Yeah, of course we have. Yeah,
Yes, there
all
are
right.
loads of
Yeah,
hundreds of
yeah,
examples.
yeah. But
Hundreds of
basically, the
examples.
people
You
in
just
power
don't know them.
have still
I'm
got
sure
the
this
power.
great
They've been to
speaker
all the
here
right
will
schools.
outline all
They've
the
been to the
great
right
lessons.
universities,
Yes.
Like
and they
any
know the
other
right
business.
people.
But the fact-
What's changed?
the fact that-
Nothing.
No, but the fact that you are saying this, and the fact that what you're saying has a resonance, is illustrative of why socialism doesn't disappear. It doesn't disappear because the idea is bad. That's why I'm saying what I'm saying. Because you were saying, oh, it doesn't work.
But
That's
why is
nothing to do with
Why
it.
is it still going on? We're supposed to get rid of this shit in the 30s,
but-
weren't we? All this privilege and fucking going to the right school, going to the right university, knowing the right fucking people, writing a few articles for
That's not the question you asked.
£300,000 a year, right? He was earning £300,000 a year for writing one article a week for the Daily Telegraph.
Actually,
right?
what's
because
happened?
he knows the right
What's
fucking
happened is-
people. Stinks.
World capitalism.
Fucking stinks.
World capitalism has established its anchor all in every crevice of the world. And the conditions that we had in the 1930s are the norm in majority of the world. And the 1930s.
But why hasn't it
kids were-
changed?
Hey,
Why hasn't it changed in 80
minute,
years?
1 minute.
It hasn't
1
fucking
minute.
changed,
1
has
minute.
it?
1 minute. It hasn't changed because we have.
That's a good one.
Because we have an ongoing struggle for change. The world is constantly changing. The world is in constant transformation. New working classes are created all around the world. There are more workers today, wage labourers today, than ever before in human history. And therefore what Marx was describing in the 1840s, the dynamics towards the working class, creating a force capable of challenging the wealth and power of capitalism, are greater today than ever before. And then the question comes in this, not is socialism possible, or is socialism desirable? Is socialism inevitable if the system of capitalism is unable to resolve the contradictions within it? If it is unable to raise the living standards, if it's unable to improve the lives of the people all around the world, then inevitably new revolutions will emerge that overthrow the system of capitalism. It's not because people want socialism, is because people are confronted by a system that they, at a certain point, can no longer and are no longer willing to tolerate.
Why have we
what
still got the
comes out
royal
of that?
family?
Sorry?
Why have we still got a
But
fucking royal family?
that's an irrelevant.
They do
We've
nothing.
had that. We've had
They
that
just
already.
turn up
We've had
at these
this.
charity events for publicity. You know, they fucking turn up in the right clothes. You know, we care. They don't give a shit. Why have we still got them? They do fucking nothing. They
That's not the
do
question you asked.
nothing.
It's not the question. I'm not disputing that. That's not the question you asked. That is just a point of view of anger, which I explained. Fits into what you asked in the first place. You said, why doesn't it change? Nothing's, of course it's always changing. Second thing is, the anger you expresses a genuine mood, not only in Britain, but worldwide. And therefore the question is, will people, now that's an open question, I can't answer you that perfect, but I can answer the trajectory. Will people respond to that, to those outlooks? Will people respond to that exploitation? Will people respond with that anger?
Are they? They're not responding, are they?
Well, it depends where you are.
They're not responding.
What do you mean they're not?
Because
You're
they're still
responding
there.
now.
You still got your George Osborne.
Yes, I
You've been
know,
at the
but
right
I'm not
schools.
disputing
Your
that.
fucking David
That's
Cameron.
indisputable
Your
and
fucking
obvious.
Boris Johnson's eaten fucking
is that not
Oxford, Cambridge.
indisputable and
Doesn't
obvious?
change. Hasn't changed in the last 100 years. And socialism, I'm sorry, has failed. It's fucking failed. Outright, it's failed, right? It has. We've got the National Health Service, yeah? All right, fair enough. All right. So it's a little bit more balanced than it used to be.
This is like
yeah?
the discussion on the Romans.
But the power structure is still there.
Yes, but we're not disputing that.
Where do we get rid of it?
disputing that.
How do we get rid of it?
So, right, that's another question. It's a different question. And that's the question I think is most important. It's not important to say, it's not unimportant, but it's not the most important to turn around and say, the Soviet Union failed. I can give you a long and detailed explanation, and I believe accurate explanation, for the failure of the Soviet Union. If you want, I can do that. That's not really what you want, though. Because if I did so, you'll say, well, that's human nature. Or a lot of people
It
would
doesn't
turn around
help
and say,
having a fucking
lot of people would
psychopath
say,
like fucking Stalin as your fucking leader, does it? The guy was a fucking psychopath, much worse than Hitler. Killed millions. Killed his own son.
then
His
the
own
question
son
comes.
killed. The guy was a
Then
fucking
the
psycho,
question
right?
comes.
That doesn't help,
Then
does
the
it?
question comes, why did that system emerge into what it emerged? Now, as I said, I can give you a detailed explanation for that. I don't think you want that now. I can give you a detailed critique of what exists in China. I don't think you want that now either. Perhaps you do. Basically, well, I'll revolve it around that for a simple reason, because it exists now. I believe if you took, like they've got in China, the majority of the biggest companies into public ownership, and you had democratic control over those workplaces, then you would have something akin to socialism. Is that an impossible dream? Well, maybe, maybe not. Is that something that people will fight for? I think it is something people will fight for. And so, therefore, it's not simply a question of it's impossible because it hasn't happened, or it's impossible because it failed before, any more than, for example, you know, you might want to get a job doing X, Y, and Z. You haven't achieved it yet, but you want to. Or someone wants to pass a driving test, hasn't passed, but wants to. Someone hasn't spoken in Hyde Park, but wants to, and attempts to emulate that by coming pretty close to the speakers and starting to talk just to see what happens. And so all sorts of trajectories are possible. And therefore, well, of course it's a monologue. That's what a speech is, mate, a monologue.
No, but you're not giving opportunity to people. Well, you are now to
I
him.
am,
No,
I
he
always
is, he
do.
is, he is.
33 years of it, mate. 33 years of it. How
I
you
don't
doing?
know,
Not
he
bad.
seems to not like me, mate. 'cause when
I don't have
Listen to
anything
him,
against you, mate.
He actually
It's
speaks
your
a lot of
behaviour
sense.
I'm
I know
objecting
he does.
to,
I
not you.
tried to
Rather
tell
than these
him that.
other deluded cunts around here, he
Yeah,
speaks
yeah,
a lot
you're
of
right.
sense,
I know.
right?
For the last hour.
I'm not disagreeing, I agree with you, and I tried to tell him that when he was causing all that drama. That was unnecessary. That was just silly.
I said, for example, my main focus in analysis, in study and research for the last 30 years has been the countries that were called communist countries. In particular, China. It's been my main focus for 30 years. Sorry?
Good afternoon.
I did. Wang Sha Hao, Wang Sha Hao, Wang Sha Hao. That's how you say it. Wang Sha Hao. Anyway, so What have I concluded from that? Chinese government claims to be communist. Communist Party, anyway. Communist Party is in power. The National Constitution of China says dialectical materialism is the official philosophy of the state. So it's not nothing. This is one of possibly the second biggest economic power in the world, claims to be Marxist. Now, I don't think it is, but I do think the reason why they claim to be Marxist is because some elements within Chinese society do correspond with Marx's idea. The first element, and that's the most important lesson from China, and it contradicts the dominant theory economically in the world. The first element is this: China's economy is not a capitalist economy. By that I mean this: it is dominated by publicly owned banks, publicly owned companies, and local governments and national government that serve a planned development program. In other words, the country's not buffeted and moved by the profit rate. The country doesn't survive or fall on the basis of a recession. You can have a recession in the Chinese economy. What happens? The Chinese government pumps money and resources into public projects that immediately overcome the economic crisis. That's what they did in 2008. A $1.2 trillion investment program that created 20 million jobs within a year.
The thing is, where are your Apple and your Nikes made? They're not made in America, because if they were made in America, you'd be paying 4 times as much. They're made by cheap labour in China.
Well,
it's been exploited big time, right? Big fucking time.
well,
but they want to be
it's a
exploited
two-edged sword.
because they're making money out of it at the same time. But
exactly. Now, what does that mean?
If your Apple phone was made in America, you wouldn't be able to afford it. Remember that.
Firstly, most of these machines are assembled in China. They aren't made in China. However, now they're beginning to move up this value chain. Now the cheap labour place is not China. Cheap labour is Bangladesh, Vietnam, Honduras, Ecuador, Mexico. It's cheaper in Mexico to employ a worker on the American border than it is to employ a worker in China. In China, they've got rights. 48-hour maximum working week.
Isn't there a place
Civil
in
servants
China? Isn't there a place in China where they've got 42,000 workers assembling computers and mobile phones, where they've got nets outside to stop people committing suicide?
Yes, there is.
That's what you're paying for when you get your cheap mobile phones and your computers, because these poor
It's not
bastards
quite
have
as
been
simple as that.
exploited.
It's not quite as simple as that, but it is true.
No, it's not as simple as that.
It is true. That is one aspect of development. But what does that aspect reveal? Well, why are the Chinese allowing this to happen? And why is China's development in those circumstances different from Honduras, Guatemala, Brazil, or India, all of whom also have cheap labour and also are exploited? Why is China different to that? For the very simple reason: because the banks are publicly owned, all the money from the private sector at night time when the Speaker's Corner Cafe closes, the bank the staff put the money in a bag, they drop it into the bank, and the bank is the People's Bank of China. What does the People's Bank of China do with that money? They don't give it to the private sector. They spend it on roads, railways, schools, public sector projects. If in Britain Corbyn becomes the Prime Minister, how is he going to get the resources? If he was to nationalise the banks, take them into public ownership, or better said, some of them should be kept in public ownership, and make them serve the needs of the people, it means all that money from the private sector gets transferred to the state. And then the state can use that money to invest for the needs of the people. That's why you could emulate that from China without emulating the dictatorship. You could emulate the mobile phones. In China, if you've got a contract for a mobile phone, it's a contract with the government mobile phone. That means that every £20 a month you pay to the mobile phone company goes to the state to be spent on schools, hospitals, roads, railways, healthcare, education and so on. Construction of housing. In China in the last 5 years, they built 36 million public sector apartments, either for cheap sale or for low rent. In that way they could accept 17 million new urban population every year. 300 million people have moved to the cities in 30 years. A bigger change than someone coming from Romania to work in London. And yet in Europe, when 150 refugees leave Libya to come to Europe, they drown in the sea because the Europeans say we can't take so many people. How can the Chinese take 17 million migrants a year when Europe can't even take 500,000? How come? When Europe is a much bigger economy than China. How come? Because China's economy is not governed by the amount of money that Alan Sugar and his buddies make out of every little business operation they engage in. China's economy is a planned economy, dominated by government planning. Now, if Britain was to take the commanding heights, the largest 150 companies, like in China, there's 102 companies owned by the state, the central state. They own, through shares, they own 100,000 companies across the country. They own all the banks, apart from one. All the banks are publicly owned. And therefore they can draw on these resources to serve the needs of government, of the people, and so on. The consequence of that is that China develops faster than any country in world history. And Britain, or Europe, or America could do the same if they took the commanding heights, the biggest companies and the biggest banks into public ownership. Out of 6 million companies in Britain, 150 control 70% of the economy. Take them into public ownership and then place the economy under democratic control. That I don't believe is some utopian dream. I believe it's a practical policy that people will automatically veer towards. And that is why socialism is not an invention by me in the park. It's not disproved by the failure of the Soviet Union or China. It's a practical solution to the world we live in today. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen. I've been speaking a long time. See you next week.
Content over everything. From your government.
Come, man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV.
This conversation with him. He's a passionate lad, and please God, he never spills any blood, only his own, in trying to save somebody else. Then you get straight to heaven and realise that. No greater love of any man than to lay down his life for his brother. There you are. God bless you.